They saw a black man in a suit and assumed the worst. They had no idea that mistake was about to cost them their careers and nearly destroy the biggest case of my life. The sun was warm on the marble steps, and for a moment everything felt right. It was one of those crisp autumn mornings in the city, the kind that makes you believe in fresh starts and the rule of law. I adjusted the knot of my silk tie, the dark charcoal of my suit feeling less like armor and more like a second skin. It was a big day. The culmination of a year's worth of work was about to unfold in courtroom 4B. The Donovan case, a sprawling web of public corruption and backroom deals that we were finally ready to bring into the light. I took a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of exhaust fumes mixed with the roasted nuts from a street vendor's cart, and started up the grand staircase of the state courthouse. That's when I saw them. 2 men standing just to the side of the main entrance. They weren't in uniform, but you can spot feds from a mile away. The ill-fitting suits, the telltale bulge of a shoulder holster, and an air of detached authority that local cops rarely manage. They were watching the flow of people lawyers with rolling briefcases, clerks clutching stacks of files, nervous-looking citizens, but their eyes weren't scanning. They were hunting, and as I reached the midway point of the stairs, their hunt ended, on me. They moved in perfect unison, a subtle, practiced maneuver designed to be casual but effective. They didn't run, they simply repositioned themselves, creating a human roadblock directly in my path. I stopped, 1 foot on the step above the other. The older of the 2, a man with a face like a worn leather briefcase and tired, granite eyes, gave me a tight, humorless smile. The younger one, built like a college linebacker poured into a suit 2 sizes too small, stood slightly behind him, arms crossed, radiating impatience. "Morning," the older one said. The word was flat, devoid of any genuine greeting. "Can we help you with something? You look a little lost." I felt a familiar weary tightening in my gut, but I kept my face neutral. I'd been playing this game my whole life. The "you don't look like you belong here" game. I gave them a polite, professional smile in return. "No thank you, gentlemen. I know exactly where I'm going." I made to step around them, but the younger one shifted his weight, subtly blocking my path again. My smile didn't waver, but my eyes hardened just a fraction. This was intentional. This wasn't a mistake. The older agent, let's call him Miller, cocked his head. "Is that so? And what business might you have at the courthouse today?" His tone was condescending, the kind you'd use on a truant teenager, not a man in a $4,000 suit on the steps of the state courthouse. "I have a hearing," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm on a tight schedule." Miller's fake smile vanished. "A hearing for what? Traffic ticket? Public intoxication?" I could feel the eyes of other people passing by, the quick, curious glances, the slight widening of their eyes as they saw 2 white men in suits cornering a black man. They'd see the scene, make their own assumptions, and hurry on their way, glad it wasn't them. The shame of it wasn't mine, but I could feel it prickling at my skin all the same. They weren't seeing Marcus Thorne, the state attorney, who'd put away more criminals than he could count. They were seeing a suspect. My tailored suit, my polished shoes, my years of education and dedication, all of it was invisible. They saw a black man, and their brains leaped to the worst possible conclusion. "It's a state matter," I said, my voice dropping a little lower, a little colder. "And it's confidential." The younger agent, Rossi, let out a short, derisive laugh. "Oh, a confidential state matter. Right. Look, pal, we don't have time for games. We're working a federal case here, and we need to make sure this area is secure. So why don't you make it easy on all of us and show us some identification?" This was it. The demand. The line in the sand. I hadn't broken any law. I hadn't done anything suspicious besides walk up the courthouse steps while being black. They had no probable cause, no reason to demand anything from me, and they knew it. This was a power play, plain and simple, an intimidation tactic to get me to scurry away. I met Miller's granite gaze. "On what grounds are you asking for my identification, agent?" I asked, my tone shifting from polite to forensic. "Am I being detained? Am I under arrest? Or am I free to go about my business?" That threw him for a second. He wasn't used to his targets knowing the script. His eyes narrowed. "You're being uncooperative." That's grounds enough for me. That's not an answer, I stated calmly. Rossi, the linebacker, had heard enough. He took a step forward, invading my personal space. The smell of stale coffee rolled off him. He said, "Show us your ID. Are you deaf?" he growled, and he reached out, his thick fingers grabbing my forearm. The moment his hand touched the sleeve of my suit, a switch flipped inside me. The calm, collected professional receded, and something harder, colder, took its place. I didn't pull away. I didn't flinch. I just looked down at his hand on my arm, then slowly back up to his face. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the morning air like a shard of ice. "Get your hand off me. Now." Miller saw the shift. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face for the first time, but Rossi just squeezed harder. "Or what?" he sneered. "You gonna sue me?" "Worse," I said, my eyes locked on Miller. "Let's just end this charade. You want to see my ID? Fine." A smirk of triumph spread across Rossi's face as he let go of my arm. Miller nodded, looking smug. "See? That wasn't so hard, was it?" I slowly reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. They watched my hand, expecting a wallet. Their posture relaxed slightly, confident they had won. They thought they had successfully put another troublemaker in his place. My fingers bypassed my wallet entirely, closing around the cool, smooth metal and plastic of my state-issued phone. I pulled it out, my thumb hovering over the screen. Miller's face clouded with confusion. "What's that? Your ID isn't on your phone." "It's not," I agreed, looking him dead in the eye. "But my contacts are." I unlocked the screen and my thumb went straight to my recent calls. I think I should probably make a call. Let's see. Who's the special agent in charge for the downtown field office this week? Is it still Henderson? I'm sure he'd be fascinated to hear exactly how his top agents are spending their morning on the steps of my courthouse. The silence that followed my question was thick and heavy, broken only by the distant wail of a siren. The name Henderson hung in the air between us like a charged particle. I saw it land, saw the micro-expressions flicker across Miller's face. He was running a rapid calculation. Was I bluffing? How would a guy like me know the name of the local FBI special agent in charge? It was a detail that didn't fit his neat, prejudiced narrative. His carefully constructed world, where he was the authority and I was the problem, was starting to crack at the seams. Rossi, however, had no time for such calculations. He saw only defiance. He saw a suspect escalating, and his training, or maybe just his temper, told him to shut it down. "You think you're a real smartass, don't you?" he snarled and lunged for my phone. His movements were clumsy, brutish. I sidestepped him easily, pulling the phone back and holding it against my chest. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move to strike him. I simply held his gaze, letting the full weight of my contempt show in my eyes. "Assaulting a citizen on courthouse property, Agent? Add that to the list for Henderson. I'm sure he'll be thrilled." "He's not a citizen, he's a perp," Rossi shot back, turning to his partner for support. "Miller, let's just cuff him and sort this out downtown." Miller didn't answer. His granite eyes were fixed on me, a deep, unsettling uncertainty dawning within them. He'd been an agent for a long time, and his instincts were screaming at him that he'd just stepped on a landmine. The suit was too well tailored. My vocabulary was too precise. My calm in the face of their aggression was too complete. The pieces weren't adding up. "What's the commotion here, gentlemen?" The voice was deep, calm, and carried an authority that immediately cut through the tension. We all turned. Standing at the top of the steps was Captain Evans, the head of courthouse security. He was a mountain of a man, a former Marine whose crisp blue uniform seemed to be forged from steel. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the scene. The two feds, me standing between them, the phone still in my hand. He knew me, of course. We'd worked together for years. His gaze settled on me, and his stern expression softened into one of professional concern. "Mr. Thorne, is there a problem? Are these men bothering you?" The effect of his words was instantaneous and devastating. Mr. Thorne. It was like a bomb had gone off in the small space between us. I saw the blood drain from Rossi's face so fast, he looked like a ghost in a cheap suit. His jaw went slack, his aggressive posture collapsing into a bewildered slump. Miller flinched as if he'd been physically struck. His eyes darted from Captain Evans to me and back again, the terrible, career-ending truth crashing down on him. The cracks in his world didn't just break, they shattered into a million pieces. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "It's all right, Captain. These agents were just introducing themselves." I turned my full attention back to the two feds, who now looked like chastised schoolboys caught cheating on a test. My voice was no longer conversational. It was the voice I used in the courtroom, precise, powerful, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Your names and badge numbers, now." Miller swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. His professional composure was a mask, and I had just ripped it clean off. He reached into his jacket with a trembling hand, pulling out his credentials. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Special Agent David Miller, badge 7314. I looked at Rossi, who seemed frozen in place, a statue of pure humiliation. "And you?" I prompted sharply. He flinched, then fumbled for his own ID. He mumbled his name, his voice barely a whisper. "Special Agent Kyle Rossi, badge 9122. I took a mental snapshot of their credentials. Miller and Rossi. The names sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place them. My mind was still focused on the hearing in 4B. "And you report to SAC Henderson at the downtown field office?" "Yes, sir," Miller choked out. The "sir" was laden with a new, panicked respect that was almost comical. "Good," I said, pocketing my phone. "You can consider yourselves on administrative leave, effective immediately. Don't go back to your office. Don't contact anyone. Wait for a call from Henderson. I can assure you, you will be hearing from him, and from the Department of Justice Office of Professional Responsibility. Am I understood?" "Yes, sir." They both mumbled in unison. They looked utterly broken. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had inverted with crushing force. They had come here this morning as hunters, and now they were the prey. But as I looked at their names again, a cold thread of realization began to stitch itself together in my mind. Miller and Rossi, Donovan case, federal liaisons. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. I'd seen their names on a dozen memos and email chains over the past 6 months. The FBI agents assigned to assist my office with the technical surveillance aspect of the Donovan corruption probe. We'd never met in person. Everything had been handled through deputies and inter-agency correspondence. They were scheduled for a pre-trial briefing with me. This morning, in 30 minutes. I looked up from their horrified faces, the pieces clicking into place with sickening certainty. This was worse than a random act of profiling. This was a catastrophic, case-threatening disaster. I felt a slow, dangerous anger begin to burn through me, an anger far colder and deeper than the initial sting of humiliation. I looked them both in the eye, letting the full weight of their mistake settle upon them. "Special Agent Miller, Special Agent Rossi," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I believe you have a meeting to get to." A cruel smile touched my lips as I watched the last traces of hope die in their eyes. With me. Their faces, already pale with shock, seemed to crumble. The look in Miller's eyes was one of pure, unadulterated horror, the expression of a man watching his entire life, his career, his reputation, his pension, flash before his eyes and burn to ash. Rossi just stared, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a fish that had been yanked out of the water and left to suffocate on the hot marble steps. Captain Evans, ever the professional, simply raised an eyebrow, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Do you want me to remove these 2 pieces of garbage, Mr. Thorne?" I gave a slight shake of my head, my eyes never leaving the 2 agents. "No, Captain, that won't be necessary," I said, my voice still dangerously quiet. "These agents and I have a great deal to discuss." I gestured with my head towards the courthouse doors. "My office. 5 minutes." I didn't wait for a response. I turned on my heel and walked away, the click of my leather-soled shoes echoing on the steps. I could feel their stunned, terrified gazes boring into my back. The walk from the front steps to the secure elevator that led to the state attorney's wing was the longest of my life. The initial fury, hot and sharp, was beginning to cool into something far more dangerous, a cold, methodical rage. This wasn't just an insult anymore. This was a direct threat to the biggest case of my career. The Donovan case was a house of cards, built on circumstantial evidence, reluctant witnesses, and complex financial data. It required absolute precision and seamless cooperation between my office and our federal partners. And the two lead federal liaisons had just committed a monumental, career-ending blunder before the trial had even begun. How could I possibly put them on a witness stand now? A savvy defense attorney would tear them to shreds. Agent Miller, isn't it true that on the morning of the pre-trial briefing, you illegally detained and racially profiled the lead prosecutor on this very case? It was a gift-wrapped acquittal. The entire investigation could be compromised. A year of sleepless nights, of poring over documents, of convincing witnesses to risk their safety. All of it could be for nothing because these two idiots saw a black man in a nice suit and their brains short-circuited. By the time I reached my office, a corner suite with a panoramic view of the city I had sworn to protect, my secretary, Maria, was already at her desk. She's a formidable woman in her 60s who has worked in this office longer than I've been alive, and she can read my mood from 100 paces. She took one look at my face and the usual cheerful, "Good morning, Marcus," died on her lips. "Hold all my calls," I said, my voice tight. "And when 2 FBI agents arrive, send them straight in. Don't offer them coffee." "Understood," she said, her expression grim. I walked into my office and went straight to the window, staring out at the cityscape without really seeing it. I loosened my tie, which suddenly felt like a noose. What were my options? I could call Henderson and have them buried so deep they'd never see a federal courthouse again. That was my first instinct, the pure, satisfying vengeance of it. But it was impractical. They were the ones who had overseen the wiretaps. They knew the surveillance data inside and out. Replacing them now, weeks before trial, would be a logistical nightmare. It could cause delays, give the defense grounds for a motion to dismiss. I was trapped. I needed them, but I couldn't trust them, and I certainly couldn't let this go. A soft knock came at the door, and Maria opened it, her face a stony mask. Miller and Rossi shuffled in like men walking to their own execution. They looked even worse under the fluorescent lights of the office, sweaty, disheveled, their cheap suits seeming to hang off them. They stood awkwardly in the center of the plush Persian rug, dwarfed by the mahogany desk and the shelves overflowing with law books. I didn't turn around. I kept my back to them, looking out the window. I let the silence stretch, letting it fill the room, letting them stew in their own miserable panic. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spoke. "The Donovan case," I said, my voice resonating against the glass. "One of the most complex public corruption cases this state has ever seen. It involves wire fraud, racketeering, bribery at the highest levels of city government. The evidence is intricate. The witness list is delicate. Success depends entirely on the flawless credibility of every single person on the prosecution's team." I turned around slowly, leaning back against the windowsill and folding my arms across my chest. I pinned them with a glare that I normally reserved for hostile witnesses on the stand. "Tell me, agents, how does your performance this morning contribute to that flawless credibility?" Miller opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like he was trying to swallow a rock. Rossi just stared at his shoes. "I'm waiting for an answer," I said, my voice like steel. "Sir, Mr. Thorne," Miller stammered, his voice cracking. "There's no excuse. It was a mistake. A terrible, unprofessional mistake. We misidentified." "Misidentified?" I cut him off, taking a step towards them. "Misidentified me as what, Agent Miller? A threat? A criminal? Someone who didn't belong on the steps of his own courthouse?" I stopped directly in front of them, forcing them to meet my gaze. "Or did you just see a black man and assume the worst? Be honest. It's the least you can do." The directness of the question seemed to paralyze them. The color rose in Miller's cheeks. Rossi looked physically ill. They couldn't admit it, and they couldn't deny it. Their silence was the most damning confession of all. "That's what I thought," I said, turning away in disgust. I walked behind my desk and sat down, steepling my fingers, The power had shifted completely. This was my room, my case. They were here on my terms. "We are profoundly sorry, sir," Miller finally managed, his voice thick with desperation. "We will do anything to make this right." "Make it right?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Do you have a time machine, agent? Can you go back 30 minutes and not treat your lead prosecutor like a common street criminal? Can you erase this entire incident from existence so that my key federal witnesses are not fatally compromised before they ever set foot in a courtroom?" I let the question hang there, a rhetorical guillotine. I watched them squirm, the weight of their screw-up finally settling on them. There had to be a way to salvage this, a way to use their catastrophic error to my advantage. An idea, cold and ruthless, began to form in my mind. It was a gamble, a huge one. But it might be the only way to save the case. I leaned forward, my elbows on the polished desk, and fixed them with a predatory stare. "You said you would do anything," I said slowly, emphasizing each word. They both nodded vigorously, their eyes wide with a desperate, pleading hope. "Yes, sir. Anything," Rossi breathed. "Good," I said, "because your official duties on the Donovan case are over. You won't be testifying. You won't be briefing my team. You won't be anywhere near the courthouse. Your careers as FBI agents are, for all intents and purposes, finished. However," I paused, letting them hang on the precipice, "I have a new assignment for you. An off-the-books assignment. It's not optional. And if you breathe a word of it to anyone, Henderson included, I will personally ensure that the only government ID you ever carry again is a library card." I could see the confusion warring with fear on their faces. They had no idea where this was going. They were expecting to be fired, to be disgraced. This was something else, something worse. "There's a witness," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "A key witness in the Donovan case. A city contractor named Frank Miller, no relation, I assume. He's the one who paid the bribes. He's our linchpin, but he's terrified. He's refused to enter witness protection, and last night he got spooked. He called my office in a panic and said the deal was off, that he wasn't going to testify." I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out a single, unmarked manila folder. I slid it across the desk towards them. "He's gone to ground, disappeared. His testimony is everything. Without him, the case falls apart. Your new assignment is to find him. You'll have no backup, no official resources, and no warrant. You will operate completely outside the system. You're ghosts." I leaned back in my chair, a grim smile playing on my lips. "And you have 48 hours to bring him to me. Or your careers won't be the only thing that's over." A thick, charged silence filled the office. Miller and Rossi stared at the manila folder on my desk as if it were a live bomb. The choice I'd given them wasn't a choice at all. It was a leash. I was offering them a single razor-thin path out of the abyss they had dug for themselves, but that path led straight through hell. Operating off the books was the cardinal sin for a federal agent. It meant no backup, no legal protection, no official sanction. If they got caught, the Bureau would disavow them in a heartbeat. They would be utterly, completely alone. But the alternative, facing an official inquiry for racial profiling and dereliction of duty, leading to the collapse of a major federal case, was a guaranteed career-ending conviction. Miller, the older and wiser of the two, seemed to understand this instantly. He looked from the folder to me and back again. The panic in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a grim, reluctant resolve. This was his penance. Rossi still looked bewildered, like a man struggling with complex math, but he followed his partner's lead. Slowly, as if afraid it might bite him, Miller reached out and took the folder. He didn't open it. He just held it, the cheap cardboard suddenly feeling like the heaviest thing in the world. 48 hours, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. It wasn't a question. It was the tolling of a bell. 48 hours, I confirmed, my voice cold and flat. You'll find my personal cell number on the inside of the folder. You will report to me, and only to me. Don't call it unless you have him. Don't even think about calling Henderson. As far as the Bureau is concerned, you're on a special assignment for the state attorney's office, the details of which are classified. I'll make the necessary calls to create that fiction. Now get out. They didn't need to be told twice. They turned and practically fled my office, the folder clutched in Miller's hand like a cursed relic. I watched them go, the heavy oak door closing behind them with a soft, final click. I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The gamble was made. The pieces were in motion. Now all I could do was wait. The next 36 hours were excruciating. I proceeded with the pre-trial hearings for the Donovan case, presenting a confident, unshakable front in the courtroom. I deflected questions from my own team about the sudden absence of our FBI liaisons with vague statements about sensitive witness-related matters. Inside, I was a wreck. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt into my throat. Had they screwed up? Had they been arrested? Or worse, had they just run? I had unleashed 2 disgraced, desperate men onto the streets of my city with a single objective, and I had no way of knowing if I'd made a brilliant strategic move or the worst mistake of my life. On the evening of the second day, with just a few hours left on my self-imposed deadline, my personal cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I stepped out of a late-night strategy session and into the quiet of my office, my hand trembling slightly as I answered. "Thorne." "We have him," a voice rasped. It was Miller. He sounded exhausted, like he'd been run over by a truck. He was holed up in a cheap motel out by the airport. He was getting ready to bolt for good. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees. "Is he cooperative?" There was a pause, and I heard a muffled scuffle in the background. "Let's just say he's persuaded," Miller said grimly. "He understands the importance of his civic duty now. Where do you want him?" This was the critical moment. I couldn't bring him to a police station or an FBI field office. The chain of custody was already hopelessly broken. I needed a secure, neutral location. "The old courthouse annex on West 3rd, I said, thinking fast. "Basement storage room B12. It's been decommissioned for years, but the locks are still good. I'll meet you there in 1 hour. Come alone, and be discreet." I hung up and stood in the darkness of my office, my heart pounding. It was done. They had done it. An hour later, I was navigating the dusty, forgotten corridors of the old annex. The air was stale and smelled of decaying paper. I found room B12 and used my master key to unlock the heavy steel door. The room was empty except for a single wooden table and 3 chairs, illuminated by a bare, hanging bulb. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. The door opened and Miller and Rossi shuffled in, looking even worse than they had 2 days ago. They were bruised, their clothes were torn, and they looked like they hadn't slept in a week. Between them, looking terrified and disheveled, was a man I recognized from photographs. Frank Miller, our star witness. He saw me, and his eyes widened. "Mr. Thorne, what the hell is going on? These guys, they aren't cops." "They're contractors," I said smoothly, my eyes locked on the 2 agents. "Employed by my office to ensure the safety of key witnesses. Thank you for your service, gentlemen. You are dismissed. I trust you know what to do now." Miller nodded, a flicker of something, maybe not respect, but at least understanding, in his tired eyes. "We'll be at home, waiting for that call." He and Rossi turned and left without another word, disappearing back into the shadows they had just emerged from. They had held up their end of the bargain. Now it was time for me to hold up mine. I spent the next 2 hours talking to Frank. I didn't threaten him. I didn't need to. The experience of being hunted down by 2 desperate ex-feds had done its work. I simply laid out the facts, the evidence we had, the prison sentence he was facing, and the full immunity I was offering in exchange for his complete and honest testimony. By the time the sun began to rise, he was a broken man, ready to tell the truth. I made a call, and within the hour, he was officially in the custody of my own investigators, safely tucked away in a state-run safe house. The chain of custody was officially restored. The Donovan trial was a brutal, hard-fought battle. But with Frank Miller's testimony, the house of cards stood firm. We got convictions on all counts. It was the biggest win of my career, a victory for the city that cemented my reputation. A week after the verdict, I sat in my office and made 2 calls. The first was to SAC Henderson at the FBI. I told him that his agents, Miller and Rossi, had performed their classified duties for my office with exemplary skill and discretion, and that their assistance had been instrumental in securing our convictions. I recommended a commendation. There was a confused silence on the other end of the line, but Henderson, a politician at heart, knew better than to question a gift horse. The second call was to the number Miller had used. He picked up on the first ring. "Miller," he said, his voice tense. "Thorne," I replied. "Check your departmental email. Your administrative leave has been terminated. You and Agent Rossi are to report for duty tomorrow morning. Congratulations on the commendation." The silence on the other end was profound. I could hear him breathing, the sharp, ragged intake of air, as a man who thought his life was over was suddenly granted a reprieve. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice choked with emotion. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city, my city, gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Because you got the job done," I said. "You made a mistake, a terrible one. You judged a man by the color of his skin instead of the content of his character. But in the end, you served the cause of justice. Consider this your second chance. Don't waste it." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I didn't do it for them. I did it for the case, for the city, and maybe, just maybe, I did it because I believe that even in a world of prejudice and power, justice can sometimes find a way to forge its own crooked path forward. They would never look at a man in a suit the same way again. And in some small, imperfect way, that felt like a victory all on its own,